All right. So today's topic is Torah's or ideas from the Torah on reopening the economy. Now, before I get started, I want to emphasize that the name of tonight's class is Ideas from the Torah on reopening the economy, but not guidance from the Torah on reopening the economy. Now, that's not to say that the Torah does not have guidance. The Torah definitely has guidance, and everything we do in the world, the Torah is our guiding light. But tonight, I'm not going to be dealing with the practical side of things on giving guidance and suggestions when things should or shouldn't open based on the Torah. Instead, I'm going to be giving ideas that would help give reason to each side of the issue. Again, so we're not going to walk away from this webinar with a clear instruction that we should open the economy tomorrow, and we are not going to walk away from this webinar with a understanding that we have to stay quarantined for the next year. Neither of those things are going to be happening today, but instead we're going to walk away with different ideas from the Torah supporting either side of this question, and that will give us more clarity on this issue as a whole. So, after having cleared that up, that we're not giving practical guidance, but instead ideas to help us further to understand this issue as a whole, and specifically what the Torah has to say about this issue as a whole on both sides of the issue. Let us begin. So I think it's appropriate to start with a very fundamental idea in Judaism, that you can't place a value on human life. Now, this is something that sounds self-understood almost. Like, obviously, how do you value a human being? Every human being is so precious. How could you put a value on it? How could you put a value on time spent with your loved ones? What's the value to that? It's infinite value. But I want to bring you a concrete, if you will, proof from the Torah for this idea. Let's say, or there's a law in Jewish law, there's a law in Judaism that on Shabbos it is forbidden to extinguish a candle. If you have a light, you're not allowed to put it out. You're not allowed to snuff out a candle. It's forbidden to do that on Shabbos. Now, let's say that you are in a storehouse. You happen to be taking a stroll on Shabbos afternoon, and you see that your storehouse, that your warehouse filled with millions and millions of dollars of all your products is catching fire. And if you don't quickly run to put out the storehouse, there's a fire in your store in your warehouse, you're going to lose millions of dollars. What's the law? The law is that you're forbidden to put out the fire and break Shabbos, because it's on Shabbos. So you're forbidden to put out the fire and break Shabbos, even if it will cost you infinite amount, $1 billion, millions of dollars. Nevertheless, it's forbidden to break Shabbos to save your money, because Shabbos is more important than money. Now, I chose this example carefully because if this fire were breaking out in a place, in a house, in a city, then the law is different. Because when you're inside a city and there's a fire breaking out, then there exists a real possibility that someone could get killed in this fire. And therefore, there's reason to say that you're able to put out the fire if it's inside of a city, and there's a fear that this fire will end up killing people. But if you're in a warehouse outside the city and there's nowhere for the fire to spread, and it's in the middle of a parking lot and there's nowhere else for it to go, you wouldn't be allowed to put out the fire, even if it would be to save all your money, the $1 billion. Still, it's forbidden to do it. Why? Because Shabbos is more important than all the money in the world. Now, let us say that the situation is not that there's a let us say that the situation is not that there is a fire in a warehouse. Let's say there's a fire in a building, God forbid, and there's people inside the building, and lives are at stake. Then what is the law? Then we must go break Shabbos to put out the fire and save the human life. So why am I saying all this? Because we see from this that Shabbos is worth more than all the money in the world. And keeping and saving a human life is worth more than Shabbos, if you will. Or you break Shabbos to save a human life. So what we see from this is, it's sort of like a mathematical, or an equation, it's a equation, if you will, that one human life is worth more than all the money in the world. Because again, you wouldn't be able to break Shabbos to save all the money in the world. But you are allowed to break Shabbos to save a human life. So what comes out of this equation is one human life is worth more than all the money in the world. That's the logic. So when back to the topic at hand, seemingly we have a clear, open shut proof that it's totally based on the Torah. You would never be allowed to reopen the economy as long as there exists even a slight possibility that someone will catch the virus, God forbid, and die from it. Because even despite the great financial loss and havoc that is wrought by having the economy closed, to say one human life is worth more than all the money in the world. That's what seems to be the conclusion based on this one or law or explanation from the Torah. So that would seem to be the case. It seems to be open shut. And I'll say something more. Let me go further in this along this line. Imagine, let me go further down this road. One of the arguments that why we should open the economy is some people say that being that the virus mostly only poses a threat to a certain segment of the population, so therefore, why should the entire population have to be locked down? Why should a virus that poses a threat to only a certain segment of the population, why should that cause that the entire country have to be locked down? So, seemingly, or I want to show how seemingly this argument does not hold water in the Torah, from a Torah perspective. And let me explain. There's a law that if there is a city and an enemy army lays siege to the city, and inside the city you might have hundreds, thousands of inhabitants, and every single person in that city, their life is in danger from the enemy that is laying siege to the city. And the enemy says like this: if you hand over one person in the city, that's all we want. We'll go away. We'll go home. We just want you to hand over. We just want you, the inhabitants of the city, to hand over one person, and we'll do with that one person as we want. And kill them, presumably. And then the rest of the city will leave alone. Jewish law says, the Torah says, that it is forbidden for the inhabitants of the city to hand over one person, even to save the entire city, which is a wondrous thing. Let's say you have 1,000 people living in the city. Seemingly logic would dictate that you should sacrifice the life of one person in the city to save the entire city. But the Torah says no. We don't sacrifice the life of one person and hand over one person to save the entire city. Now, obviously, there's a concept of going to war, and when an army goes to war, there will be casualties, and the Torah accepts that. But nevertheless, in this specific case, so again, we have an enemy demanding that one person from the city be handed over, and then we'll spare the whole city. We don't hand that person over. That's what the Torah says. And applying that logic to our case, this idea that we sacrifice the life of an entire, this idea that we say that why should the lives of a small segment or a segment of society, why should all of society suffer for a small segment, is not a Torah idea, as we see from this example, that we're willing to subject a whole city to a siege in order to save the life of one individual in this case, or in order not to hand over and kill and cause to be killed one individual in this case. So again, here we see the tremendous value that Torah places on preserving life, and even the life of one person or a segment of the population, and how that's more important than everything else. And we don't sacrifice that. We don't give that up. Okay. So seemingly up until this point, we've brought very strong arguments how you cannot risk any life by opening the economy. But let us now look at the other side of the equation. Last week in the Torah, we did not read the Torah portions publicly in most shuls. From my understanding, there still are some shuls in unique places in the world where they are still reading from the Torah. I believe there's a old age home in South Africa. That is, the whole old age home is quarantined. The whole old age home is quarantined, so they are still reading from the Torah. I also believe there's a minyan going on in the Western Wall. But for the most part, most of us, at least most us in Columbus, we did not merit to publicly read from the Torah last week, but we could have definitely read from the Torah privately. And one of the topic that we talked about, 2 weeks ago, not last week, 2 weeks ago. The topic that was talked about 2 weeks ago was the topic of the Mitzorah, the leper. The Torah describes in detail how if there's a person, an individual, is sinful and is punished, God sends him this leprosy, not a physical ailment of leprosy, like the disease, but a spiritually the disease would actually appear on the skin, but it was caused by a spiritual illness as a result of sins. And this person would have to, until they would be cured of this spiritual leprosy, which actually did manifest physically, but it was rooted in spiritual problems. Until this person was cured from their leprosy, they would have to be secluded from the city. They would have to leave the city and sit alone in the corner. And it's written in the explanations of the Torah that this person who was forced to live separately from the city was considered dead. Meaning, forcing this person to live separately from everyone else was considered as if you forced him to die, if you will. And we see from this the great toll that seclusion could take on a person. So this has to be taken into account. And again, it is, I know people realize this obviously, but I'm bringing a source from the Torah that clearly shows us how serious it is to seclude a person and cut a person off from society. We know that one of the most serious punishments that could be met out by a Jewish community is to excommunicate a person and to say No one's allowed to talk to them. Why? Why is this such a serious punishment? Because being cut off from society is the most painful thing. Or I don't know, the most, but such a painful thing. It's so hard. And therefore we see the great natural human need that people have to come in contact with other people, and how painful it is not to be. And this also has to be weighed. And again, here, these are Torah sources for this. What's more, the Lubavitch Rebbe talked about, this is something he believes in and talked about, how medicine and healing is not only an issue of drugs and surgery. Although obviously drugs and surgeries, these are these are the foundations for curing in modern society. And they truly have brought us great wonders, all the different medicines that we have, and we thank God for. And we give gratitude to the doctors who discovered them, and God will inspire the doctors. But besides for, again, medicine, and cures and drugs, the Rebbe talked about the great importance of mindset. And the Rebbe said that, in a way, mindset is is equally a factor in healing. Meaning, if someone, God forbid, is sick, so on a basic level, give them the proper drugs that will heal their sickness, or perform the procedure that needs to be performed to heal their sickness. And the Rebbe said, of course, the drugs and the procedures are necessary, but one cannot discount, one has to take into effect the great effect that mindset has on healing, that being in a positive frame of mind has on healing. As a matter of fact, there's a book, and I'm forgetting the name, but it was written by a great doctor, and it talks about hope and healing. And this is not a self-help expert who wrote this. It's not a rabbi. It is a very distinguished doctor, cancer doctor. And this doctor wrote a whole book explaining how he sees how the tremendous role that hope and positivity plays in a medical recovery. So therefore, when fighting, this is something that the Rebbe talked about, and the Rebbe believed in very deeply. And therefore, very interestingly, when the Lubavitch Rebbe, had a heart attack, he refused to go to the hospital. And presumably this was because in a hospital, it's not necessarily a comfortable or a comfortable or a uplifting place. And in a person's home, their own turf, that's a place which is more comfortable and happy. And the doctors were called in. They said, Rebbe, you have to go. It's dangerous. And the Rebbe said, no, I want to stay here. And the doctors couldn't handle it. Well, the Rebbe insisted. The Rebbe actually did stay. He did not go to the hospital. Now, again, this is not a general guidance. This is a specific case where the Rebbe chose to do what he did, and who knows the Rebbe's exact reasoning. But the idea was, this is definitely a theme that the Rebbe said very clearly, a person's mental happiness and mental and frame of mind and positive frame of mind has tremendous effect on their physical health. And therefore, this is also something that needs to be taken into account. Although it's true that we have to be careful and avoid the virus, although it's very true, but we also have to take into account the toll of the mental toll of seclusion it has on people. And again, like I said before in the beginning of the class, like I'm going to say at the end of the class, I am not going to give, this is not to give specific guidance So no one should walk away from the class and say, therefore I can do this because of what Yitzi said, or I cannot do this because of what Yitzi said. I'm not coming to give specific guidance. This is not the place of that. But I'm just giving ideas from the Torah into this topic, and food for thought on this topic, on how Torah illuminates this topic. Let us say more. Let us continue. There's a famous story in the Torah. The story of Yaakov and his sons. Well, there's many stories of Yaakov, our forefather, and his sons. But there's one very famous one where this was already after Yaakov, Joseph's son, had been sold as a slave by his brothers, and eventually rose to become the vice king, the second in command of the country of Egypt. And there was a great famine throughout the world, and only in Egypt did Joseph, Yaakov's son, who unbeknownst to Yaakov was now the king of Egypt, only in Egypt under Joseph's command was there food. And Yaakov's sons did not know where their brother was. They didn't know that Joseph was in charge of the whole Egypt, and he had control of the food. But what they did know, they were living in Israel, and they were acutely aware that there was a famine. There was no food to be had, and they desperately needed food. So they went down to Egypt. And when they went down to Egypt, they did not know that Egypt was controlled by their brother. But their brother took one of them captive. He gave them their food, and they were able to return to their homeland with food and keep their families fed. But he took one of their brothers captive. And more time went by, and the brothers had to return to Egypt to get more food. But Jacob, their father, did not know what to do, because last time he sent their brothers down to get food, one of them was captured. And now Joseph actually insisted that his youngest brother come down, be brought down to Egypt. So the brothers and their father had this question. On one hand, we're dying of hunger. We need food. On the other hand, who knows what Joseph will do? They didn't know it was Joseph, but who knows what this man in Egypt will do to us if we go for food? So it was a definite danger to their lives. And nevertheless, despite their father's misgivings, they had no choice. There was no food. And they were forced to go down to Egypt and risk being imprisoned and dying in Egypt. But they had no choice. They had to eat. And ultimately, when they went down to Egypt, Joseph told them, I am your brother, and I will take care of you, and not to worry. But the point was, we see from the story, that despite the definite danger to their lives that was posed by going down to Egypt, the need to eat was even more serious. And they had to go down. So I guess this also weighs in on this topic that, although we have to do everything we can to not endanger human life, we also need to eat. And let me continue on. There is we know that for the Jewish people, our true life is from the Torah. Like there's a story, Rabbi Akiva, he lived in Israel under the Roman occupation. And the Romans said that it was forbidden for the Jewish people to learn Torah. And Rabbi Akiva disregarded this command, and he taught Torah. And he was arrested by the Romans, and they were going to kill him. And he was teaching Torah under pain of being arrested and being killed. And someone walked over to him and said, Rabbi Akiva, how could you be risking your life to teach Torah? So Rabbi Akiva said, one time there was a fox, and the fox peered into the river, and he saw a fish, but he couldn't get to it. It was too far. The fox didn't like to swim. So he was trying to convince the fish to come out to the river, to come close to the fox. The fox couldn't eat him. So the fox told the fish, "Fishy, it's very dangerous for you in the river. There's fishermen that have nets and they're trying to catch you. And every second that you're in the river, you're risking your life you're risking your life." So the fish replied to the fox, a genius, a smart one, sarcastically, "If we stay in the river, we might get caught by the fishermen, we might not get caught by the fishermen. But if we go out on dry land, we're for sure going to die of suffocation. So what do you think we should do?" Rabbi Akiva told this man, if I teach Torah, I might get caught and get killed, and I might be able to survive. I might not get caught. But if we don't teach Torah, then I'm for sure going to lose our spiritual and our source of life, because we know that the Torah is the source of life for the Jewish people. So Torah is the source of life, and Torah is the ultimate. So seemingly we should learn Torah all day. But the answer is not quite. The Mishnah teaches us, the Mishnah says, if there's no bread, there's no Torah. In order for us to be able to learn Torah, we have to first have bread. We have to have what to eat. So this, I guess, idea illustrates this this idea drives home the story and illustrates and plays out what we just read about Yaakov, our forefather. How, despite the great danger in going down to Egypt, Yaakov knew ultimately they had no choice. They had to risk their lives, because if they don't eat, they're for sure going to starve. And again, without giving clear guidance that this is what you should or shouldn't do, this also has to be taken into account. That ultimately, in order for, we must be careful and be on guard about the disease, but also we have to take into account that people need to eat. And if there's nothing but to eat, then we also can't live. So again, just to finish off, obviously the answer to all these questions, and what indeed should we do, the experts have to weigh all these different factors and come to the God, and hopefully God should lead them to the right conclusion. And we should be given the best guidance. God should protect us. And again, how to go about it. This is the experts must weigh all these factors, and hopefully God will guide them to the right conclusion. But I did want to tonight share with you different ideas from the Torah on this quite relevant topic. And may we all be healthy and happy and taken care of all our needs. And may we continue to study the Torah. All the best.